Today we're going to talk about the graphs of sine and cosine. We've already gone over the basic shape. Now we're going to get into the details of graphing them individually. First, we need to define three concepts. First, we're going to define the period. The period is the horizontal distance required to complete one full cycle. Second is the amplitude. The amplitude is half the distance between the min and max value of the function. So this means it's going to tell us how high and how low the graph will go. Finally, we have the phase shift. The phase shift is going to tell us the distance the function is shifted horizontally. First, let us review the basic shapes of the sine and cosine graph. First thing I need you to write down is the equation. The first for sine is a times the sine of bx plus c plus k. So these coefficients a, b, and c are going to affect the graphs in different ways. Notice the cosine graph has the same thing, but you're just changing sine to cosine. Alright, let's look at the basic shapes. So first for sine. Remember, the sine graph is always going to start on the x-axis. It's going to go up, down, and back to the x-axis. So that's our basic shape of our sine curve. For our cosine curve, we're going to start up at the amplitude, go down, and back up. So that's what our basic shape of our cosine curve is going to look like. It's almost like a U shape. Alright, when we graph the sine and cosine graph, we're going to have to find the period, the amplitude, and we're not necessarily going to use the phase shifts, but let's go ahead and talk about everything first. So the period. The period is going to be 2 pi over b. The amplitude is going to be the absolute value of a. The phase shift, which I said we're probably not going to use, but we'll just write it down anyway, is going to be the negative c over b. Alright, these vertical shifts, this plus k on both of our formulas, or both of our equations. The plus k is our vertical shift, so it's going to move our graph up, where the minus k will move our graph down. If we look at both the cosine curve and the sine curve, we'll notice that they continue on forever. That's why I put these arrows on the end of the graphs, so that it's telling me that it's going on forever in both directions. So that means that the domain is going to be all real numbers. The range really just depends on what your amplitude is. So for right now, we're just going to put negative a to positive a. And then the last thing we need to look at is we're going to have to find an interval, because we're only going to graph one cycle. So to find our interval, we're going to have to solve the inequality. 0 is less than or equal to bx plus c is less than or equal to 2 pi. So this is all the information we need to graph the sine and cosine curves. Alright, the first example. We're going to look at y equals 3 times the sine of 2x plus pi over 2. First, we're going to identify what our a, b, and c are. So first, remember, a is the number out in front of sine. So a in this case is going to equal 3. Then b is the number in front of the x, so b is going to equal 2. And then we have c is going to equal pi over 2. So it's always good to go ahead and label a, b, and c. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have to find the period. So remember, the period is 2 pi over b. So if I go ahead and look, so I put 2 pi over, and b in this case is 2. So I'm going to put 2 pi over 2. So notice the 2's cancel, and you're just left with pi as the period. Now the amplitude The amplitude is going to be the absolute value of A. In this case, A is 3, so the absolute value of 3 is just going to equal 3. So this tells me my graph is going to go up 3 units and also down 3 units. And then the last piece of information we're going to find is the interval. So you're going to have 0 is less than or equal to, and then you're just going to take whatever's in that parentheses right there and put it in the middle. So 2x plus pi over 2 is less than or equal to 2 pi. Now, we need to solve this equation, so we want to get x, or solve this inequality, so we want to get x by itself in the middle. So the first thing we're going to have to do is subtract pi over 2 on both sides. So if I subtract 0 minus pi over 2 is going to be negative pi over 2. It's less than, you're just going to be left with 2x in the middle. And then 2 minus pi over 2 is going to give us 3 pi over 2. Remember, you need to get a common denominator to subtract that. Finally, we need to get rid of the 2, so we can do one of two things. You can divide both sides by 2, or just go ahead and multiply both sides by 1/2. So when we do that, we're going to get negative pi over 4 is less than or equal to 2x. Is going to equal x is less than or equal to 3 pi over 4. So now we have our interval. Now that we have our interval, we're going to have to find 5 points. Our first point is always going to be whatever you got for the end of your interval. So in this case, our first point is negative pi over 4. To find our other points, you're simply going to take the period and divide it by 4. So up here, I'm going to take pi, divide it by 4. So if I do that, each time I'm going to add pi over 4 to find my 5 points. So if I go ahead, if I finish finding my 5 points, so that means my second. So I'm going to take negative pi over 4 plus pi over 4. That's going to give me 0. Then I take 0 plus pi over 4. I'm going to get pi over 4. My fourth point, pi over 4 plus pi over 4, is going to give me pi over 2. And then my last one, pi over 2 plus pi over 4, is going to give me 3 pi over 4. So notice your fifth point should always match up with the end of your interval. Alright, now we're ready to graph it. So the first thing you're going to do is draw your xy axis on your graph. In this case, I only have one negative value, so I'm going to shift it over to the left. Once you have your xy axis, now you're going to label your 5 points on the x-axis. So you have negative pi over 4. I have 0, pi over 4, pi over 2, and 3 pi over 4. So once you have your 5 points labeled, now we can actually graph the sine curve. The sine curve is always going to start on the x-axis. So on my first point, I'm going to be on the x-axis. Then we said our amplitude was 3, so I'm going to go up to 3, back down to the x-axis, down to negative 3, and then back to the x-axis. So now I can go ahead and connect those dots, and we have the graph of this equation. Alright, I want you to go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to try to find the period, the amplitude, and the interval on your own. Once you have found all 3 of those, then go ahead, play the video again to see if your answers match up. Alright, so you should be getting 2 pi over 3 for the period. Your amplitude is going to be positive 2, and our interval is going to be negative pi over 3 to positive pi over 3. If you did not get this, we will address it in class. So our first point, remember, is going to be negative pi over 3. Now, if we take the period and divide it by 4, so if I take 2 pi over 3 and divide it by 4, I'm going to get pi over 6. So each time to find my 5 points, I'm going to go ahead and add pi over 6. So that means my second point, negative pi over 3 plus pi over 6, is going to be negative pi over 6. Negative pi over 6 plus pi over 6 is going to be 0. 0 plus pi over 6 is going to be pi over 6. And then finally, pi over 6 plus pi over 6 is going to give you pi over 3, which matches up with the end of our interval. So now we're ready to graph this cosine curve. Alright, go ahead and draw your xy axis. In this case, I'm going to draw it right in the middle. And now we're going to go ahead and label our 5 points. So we're starting with negative pi over 3, negative pi over 6, 0, pi over 6, and then finally pi over 3. So in this case, we're graphing our cosine curve. So our cosine curve is a little different. It's going to start at whatever your a value is. So if you take a look at the equation, in this case your a value is negative 2. So at my first point, I'm going to be down at negative 2. Then again, every other point is going to hit the x-axis. So I go back to the x-axis. Now I have to go above, so I'm going to go up to positive 2, back to the x-axis, and then back down to negative 2. So if I connect it, in this case it's going to be an upside down U. So this concludes graphing sine and cosine curves. In class we'll pick up with a few more examples. Please make sure to write any questions you have down so that way I can answer them at the beginning of class.